Hi there, welcome to the next part in this series on the Trojan Knight opening. Here we're going to be looking at lines where white plays the move 2e3 but avoids the really critical main lines which happen after e6, knight f4, knight c6 and bishop b5. Okay, so the first place white can deviate from this is on move 3. Probably the most common way to deviate would be knight c3, and we'll look at that in a moment. There are other moves also, such as the queen manoeuvres out to f3 and h5. I feel these are probably quite easily countered by black. Here f5 is quite reminiscent of another atomic opening, which starts with the move 1e3, e6 and then queen f3. However, I feel this is probably a better version even for black, and that other opening I just mentioned is also quite good for black. So here you shouldn't really have any problems at all. The reason this isn't quite so strong is because of the weakness on f3, which is created by this knight coming out to h3. After queen g3, queen h4 is good for black here, immediately threatening to win a piece, and it's quite hard to see how white can avoid it. Knight g5, queen takes h2 is coming, and this knight is going to come into black's camp, but it's not going to provide enough compensation. Queen takes b7 is more natural. However, it allows this queen to come out, and this is where the weakness on f3 really shows itself. So after this, queen e4, white's got a lot of weaknesses. Also possible, of course, is the knight f6 move, which is another idea borrowed from the 1e3 opening. And if, say, f3, knight e4, anyway, as if white decides to take this knight, he would immediately lose to this queen manoeuvre, and now the knight cannot block on f3, so black's immediately winning when mating on e2. So the queen manoeuvres aren't particularly impressive for white. Other moves, d4, I feel is probably also quite weak, as this e4 square is very soft. What black can immediately stick his queen there, and he's doing at least okay here, probably quite well in fact. Moves like c3 or b4, as we'll look at in a moment, both of these moves have the idea of delaying knight f4 in order to somehow improve white's chances in the main line, as this c3 move will avoid any ideas of the queen coming out to b4 and taking on b2, as we saw in the history videos. Black can respond with knight c6, and now if knight f4 will transpose to a line we'll look at in a moment, which usually happens if white begins with knight f4 and then answers knight c6 with c3. Also possible perhaps is bishop b5. Now d5 is a good move, as knight f4 can now be answered by e5, and black's doing perfectly okay. If this knight obviously can't take on d5 because of the attack on d2 from the queen, and knight h5 can be answered in two ways, both of which are mentioned in the tactical videos earlier in the series: bishop g4 or queen h4 to h3. b4 can be answered in the same way with knight c6 when knight f4 will transpose. Also possible is the natural d5. Now bishop b2 can be answered naturally with e5, and black's doing quite well, quite a harmonious position. Other moves aren't particularly impressive either. Queen h5, looking at coming in the way that black did a minute ago onto this e5 square. However, black's queen manoeuvre can quite easily counter this, either to f4, exchanging the queens of equality, or the more interesting move f6. Knight f4 is probably white's best try. Black has two options, or at least two options here. e5 is one, when knight h5 can be answered by the thematic again, bishop g4. f3 give black no problems at all, and queen f3 we arrive at this typical imbalance with chances for both sides. Possibly an even better idea is knight f6. This has the point that black's eyeing these squares g4 and e4, and if allowed to get into these squares will have very good chances. And if white plays the obvious move, knight takes e6, snapping this knight off and winning a pawn, he's quite rudely awakened by this bishop manoeuvre to h3. And if white takes this bishop, queen h4 will immediately win for black. So that's impossible. And if he doesn't take this, then obviously this bishop's just going to snap off g2 itself. So black's doing very well indeed, winning material. Final one we'll look at is knight a3. We actually looked at this line, well, it transposes to one we looked at earlier after b5. In the video we looked at earlier when white played knight a2 in one of the rare alternatives. In that line we looked at knight f4, bishop b7, and black was doing perfectly okay. Another option is queen h4, g3, and now black can either go to e4, seems the most natural to me, or even b4, and after c3 either come back to e4 or take on b2. I personally don't like giving away this queen for these pieces unless I have to, but certainly a valid option. After queen e4, d3, really the safest line would be simply be queen f3 and b5. But an interesting idea, possibly stronger, I'm not sure, is an idea played by Sordid, a very strong computer program. Queen g2, with the idea that knight f6 coming into g4, the natural move to stop that would be f3, but now knight c6, and this black knight's coming into b4, and black's getting a lot of good play. Sorry, one more worth mentioning before we go on to knight c3 is bishop b4. Possibly f5 is possible, is a possibility, but black probably can just grab this pawn. I don't see that white's got any immediate killing manoeuvres. Probably the most obvious one, and one that might first seem quite strong for white, is this manoeuvre to c5, threatening both the mate on e7 or f8 and to take on c7. However, black can quite simply counter with his own queen manoeuvre, exchange the queens, and black will be perfectly okay. Probably stronger than the queen manoeuvre would simply be to play something like knight c3, just try and gain some counterplay in compensation for the pawn. But I don't think after something like c6, black's doing perfectly okay, shouldn't be worse here. So on to knight c3. This is a reasonably common line. And again, similar to how I mentioned with the moves c3 and b4 earlier, the idea for white is simply to gain an improved version of the main line, as now any manoeuvres with queen h4 to b4 are completely cut out, as the move to b4 won't be threatening d2. And also knight c6 isn't going to be so strong as it would be after knight f4. So the natural move is bishop b4, just pinning this knight, and now knight f4. Could mention a few other moves that white can try here, and most of them are just going to transpose to lines with knight f4, as without playing this move there's not a lot that white can do to really put pressure on black. So for example, bishop b5, knight f4. These lines are all just going to knight c6 could be interesting here, but again d5, knight f4. These will all transpose to lines we'll look at in a moment. g3, g6, knight f4. if white wants independent play, he probably has to develop this queen out. Queen out to f3 or h5. But similar to the lines we looked at before, these queen manoeuvres aren't particularly strong. Queen g3 can be answered by queen h4. And queen takes b7. This queen manoeuvre to e4. Looking at a lot of weak squares. This occurred in a game between, just mentioned also, queen to e5 can easily be countered by queen h4 with an exchange of queens. This queen b5 idea was tried by Recursive against the computer Sorted. However, Sorted did get a very strong game with this queen manoeuvre to e4, and now he's threatening to come into d3 to take on c2 and to come into f3. The only way to counter all these ideas is to play bishop e2, which defends on the f3 square, and also any queen moves can be answered by castles. So Sorted played queen g2, and now Recursive's king was stuck in the centre, and after d5 I feel black's doing particularly well. So knight f4. Now black continues in the same style as the old main line with g6. You can get away with this extra move, knight c6, knight c3, bishop b4 move thrown in, for tactical reasons that we'll look at after knight h5. White can try other things, as mentioned before, all those moves. g3, it hasn't been played very much, but it's quite an interesting move, this g3. Black can either play knight c6, which is going to give typical play for this variation, or perhaps a more interesting move, h5. This has the idea that queen f3, which would be the usual counter to this h5 move, f5, and now knight here, c6. And black's hoping that allowing white to get this strong knight, he can then harass white's exposed queen to get compensation. Another similar idea would be, instead of f5, to play d5, and after knight to h3, hitting f7 and threatening knight g5. You can do the same thing with f4, looks natural, maybe even d4, getting play against the queen. Can't recommend the move knight to d5, as after e takes queen f3, white hasn't got this knight anymore to harass with knight to h3, and therefore queen f6 is perfectly okay for black, and he's just simply a piece for a pawn up. Bishop b4 may be worth throwing in. c6 is a natural block, and then again it's going to be similar perhaps with g3 h5 to a line we looked at previously. A better version for black with this c6 move thrown in for free. d4. Now maybe even again here h5 is possible to answer queen f3 with f5. Knight c6 looks interesting, or d5 seems natural as well. Lots of good moves for black here. Now black can answer this knight h5 move with the queen manoeuvre to e4. Very strong manoeuvre. And against other ideas, he'll simply plan to play h5 to stop any idea of knight h5 in the future. Maybe another line, h4. This is an idea to completely stop queen h4 for good. However, it also prevents, I say after d5 is a natural move for black, prevents white from playing knight h5, as black can simply take this, and the queen h5 killing, usually the killing move, can now be answered by queen takes h4. So